but not least, the Team Builders.
All right.
And I'm excited about this because this man right here is the king, the man, the legend of Team Builders. Nobody does it better than him, at least for the setup and for like the getting you into that atmosphere. He's a master of that. So here's the thing about the Team Builder, right? This is very, very important. The Team Builder takes the idea from the presentation and it asks the question, okay, how does this apply to a group dynamic? All right? So let me repeat that again, because it's very, very important, right? Don't get lost in this. An official team builder, like literally what a team builder is how does this concept that you just learned in the main presentation, how does that apply when you're working with other people? Which is pretty important because if you're a leader, you're going to be working with other people. So this lesson is just not an individual lesson. It's a lesson of how you can apply it to others, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like very, very powerful. Once they've learned the lesson, then it's like, okay, how can I apply it when I work with other people? And so the team builder, the thing you got to know, the thing I wanted to add about the team builder was the pre-frame. The way you set it up is everything, right? Because literally it's just an activity unless you frame it. Like it's almost like a picture, and unless you put the frame around it. So like for example, let's say like this right here, this area right here, right? Like I mean, there's so many things to focus on this area, right? You can focus on the current, you can focus on a speaker, you can focus on what is this called? The cajon again. You can focus on the window. But if I brought like a big old frame, literally a paint frame, and I said focus on this right here. Like I just want you to focus on this part. Then that's what you're doing with the pre-frame before you start the team builders. You're gonna say, this is what from the team builders what I want you to focus on. And I feel like you do that great with the setup, right? Like the theme, like even like, hey, like it's 1950 and there's a war going on between the North Koreans and the United States, and like I feel like you set them up in a context to focus on certain things.
Yeah. I mean, to me, I'm always thinking like the experience, what's the story behind this team builder, and then how can you bring the students into it? So I like to. What is it that brings people together and kind of forces people to work together more than anything else? Right. What would you say? It's going to be some challenge, some problem. Okay, yeah, you can have one. Like right now, my daughter has a problem. She's hungry. Okay, and you too. So often it centers around some sort of disaster, you know, whether that's like a fire took place or there was a war, or maybe there's been a flood or something, because that's what brings people together. People are forced to work together. So I like to think of a scenario is what if there was a group of people together and there was some sort of natural disaster or there was some sort of problem that had to be overcome. You want to actually bring them into that. So maybe you have music that kind of backs, you know, the music changes and it changes the whole tone as you tell the story. Maybe you have props or you come dressed up. I don't know. One time we had a flood, right? That was our situation. Our problem was a flood, and so I came in all wet and I had dumped water over my head, right? So you're trying to bring the students into that story. Yeah. And so you're acting. It's almost like a skit as well. It could be as you're setting up the story because you want them to actually pretend like they're in that situation. Imagine what it would be like.
Yeah. So then setting that up, and then as through that setup, you're also starting to frame a little bit about what you want them to focus on. Yeah. So if it's like there's a flood, you know, maybe that's teaching them the fact of like when there's an emergency, like what should you do, right? Like how can you work with other people in times of crisis or something like that. Like make sure you kind of pose it, and you can almost pose it as a question, like what would you do during this time? I think that's so important, just to be able to pre-frame what you want them to focus on. And then just as like the icebreaker or an energizer, just make sure you know, it's pretty identical, like make sure you know the instructions very well, even better with a team builder, because you're dealing with a little more complicated things than usually an energizer or or an icebreaker. So make sure you walk through it with in your head, like Coach Eric talked about. You know, you've run through it with the other officers a couple times before, just because the team builder is like, usually around that time the energy is a little bit lower, just because they might have been sitting for 10 minutes for the presentation, so you want to make sure that it's very clear what they need to do. You announce the team builder, they're doing the team builder. What are you doing during that time as a facilitator? Because you've transferred over from a presenter to a facilitator when you start doing the team builder. And I think the job of a facilitator is you don't know what, like you have some, like you know what you're looking out for and you know what you're going to say afterwards, but it's almost like you're listening as a facilitator. And your listening is your eyes. You're looking at people and you're seeing how they're responding to each other, how they're responding to the game, and then what you're going to do is you're going to use some of that for the debrief. So if you notice people are fighting, they're like, they give up because it's too hard. You want to keep a little log in your head and remember that what they did, because then you can bring it up in the debrief, right?
Yeah, no, exactly, because you have to be very flexible. You might have your plan, you might have your questions that you're going to ask, and you might have the lesson that you want to bring out, which is good. But you also, I think there's just that willingness to be flexible and address the issues that you see coming up, like you said.
When you finish the team builder, you can use some of those things that you've seen and you observe people and then you interacted when you're debriefing. Also in the debrief, you should have some, I would say 3 to 4 questions, predetermined questions that you're going to ask. Now, you might change those questions based on being flexible. Like you notice, I really want to bring out this point that I didn't realize like that was going to come out of this, based on what the participants did or the students did. But having predetermined questions, you're also not freaking out like, well, what if I don't have any questions? Some people work differently. Some people are just on the spot, like, I'm just gonna see how students react and then ask a question. Other people more, I need to have my 3 questions and be able to do that. So
yeah, I think it also helps you keep the theme tied to the lesson too. So they're not like, what does this have to do with what we just learned?
Right.
Coach Congress talked about it earlier, is making it simple and keeping it all towards the same point, whatever you're doing. So you have to be pretty diligent to fight for that. So.
Yep. And then there's different ways to debrief. I'm gonna give you guys some resources to be able to figure out like what's a good way to debrief. But I would say keep it at 3 to 4, no more than 4 questions for sure, for the debrief. There's a ton of different ways, and I'll give you guys some resources because there's so many ways to debrief. But the debrief is key because it's not just about entertaining them and them being active. It's also about them learning something, and they learn most when they are able to talk about and answer questions about what they've learned. So.